day, friends. I've had some thoughts show up this morning about the language that we use, that I use, to think about our kind of larger context practice, life practice, we might call it, spiritual practice. And it's, for example, the word spiritual practice, I use it all the time. But I've also encountered moments, for example, when I'm thinking about marketing something, or even just presenting it to friends or maybe potential collaborators or potential clients, and all of a sudden the word spiritual, which I sort of use as my own way of saying the largest context of life, the ultimate kind of evolution of consciousness, which is emptiness, completely formless consciousness, therefore kind of untarnished by any of the baggage that often accompanies organized religions, or even little offshoots of organized religion. So I feel like I sound like I'm rambling. What I'm trying to say is, I use the word spiritual and spiritual practice in a certain way, but then when I find myself communicating externally, when I find myself communicating to other groups of people, all of a sudden I will start to hear. It's like I hear the word differently. The word shows up as this kind of culturally potent word. And I notice myself then beginning to kind of hedge, or beginning to want to be careful how I use that word, how I use language in general. And I find that there's a part of me that knows that there's a dimension of language that's non-verbal, and so what's coming through when I use a certain word, or when I speak about a certain topic, what's coming through is there's a part of it that's just the language. It's just the words that are being transmitted. But then there's another dimension underneath that, a whole other, it's not other, but it's just the rest of the picture. It's like if verbal communication is, what do they say, like 7% of the information being transmitted? That's tip of the iceberg type stuff. The rest of the iceberg is still there underneath. And I sometimes take both solace in that, and also some degree of responsibility is there, because it's not just what I say that communicates or transmits. It's the whole iceberg. Just because language is just the tip doesn't mean we're not transmitting the whole iceberg. We are. So what's under that like background of both conscious and semi-conscious or even unconscious conceptual content or emotional content, what's underneath my communication is ultimately all transmitting. Whether I want to or not. And so, I think the value of language and the value of really wrestling with language is not just because we'll say the right words, right? If the right words are only a small part of the picture, and it's not that it's not an important part, but it's a small part. But wrestling with language and considering what words to use to express an idea or an emotion, that process involves connecting with the rest of the iceberg of those words. I think, we saw a television series by Brene Brown maybe like a year ago. I forget when we saw it. It's called Atlas of the Heart. And she speaks about how few emotions we actually typically have language to describe. It's like mad, sad, and glad, right? Anger, grief, joy. And and her kind of whole point of that series is we want to really develop the language to speak about different emotions with a high degree of detail, because if we can't, because that process of kind of connecting with them through the language, through the linguistic understanding, opens the door to our experience of them. If we continually take our experience and have to funnel it through the narrow chamber, the narrow canal of a few, 3, 4, 5 different words, then we're actually editing our experience. We're actually like rounding everything up or down to anger, grief, and joy. And so I don't know why I'm reflecting on this today. I think it's partly maybe just some of the communication I've had recently, and some of every once in a while I'll kind of be talking about something and suddenly I'll hear myself. I hear myself speaking, and I feel a connection between what's coming out of me and what's underneath it. And this bigger picture bigger picture impression just kind of hits me. And oftentimes the first feeling I have is that my language is clumsy. It's like such a inadequate description of what I'm really going through or really trying to say. But then I remember what I just was talking about a moment or two ago, which is that it's not about getting the language perfect. The process of linguistic evolution is mostly about developing the rest of the iceberg that's underneath all those words, the thought process, the conceptual clarity, the presence of mind. That's what that kind of sinking into language process really offers. but the result then is that through that heightened internal clarity, through that deeper consciousness, also little by little, language gets more clear. Language starts to be right there, like all the right words, or more of the right words that more closely approximate the intended meaning, start to be available. And I think, I think this is maybe coming because I was reflecting on this post, and I was reflecting on what I'm doing here. Periodically this post kind of comes back into focus as a practice. There are periods where it just goes on, and I'm just kind of in it. Every day something's kind of bubbling for me and it's coming out. But other days, I kind of come back to working with, well, what's this really about? And what I keep coming back to over and over is by putting words to my experiences from the deepest context I can reach at any moment and on each given day. There's a process of deepening my own awareness that happens even when I have no idea what I'm going to talk about, even when I am talking about something and I kind of talk myself into a dead end or a cul-de-sac. Ever have that? Right? Because that happens, of course, when we're thinking too. We sort of like think our way into a cul-de-sac, and we're just going round and round. But somehow expressing that out loud, using my words to express that, it's like I get a mirror. I get a glimpse. I get that moment of impression of hearing what's coming out of me, while at the same time being in the rest of the iceberg, right? The rest of the iceberg is still in my consciousness. I'm kind of in the iceberg, and the tip is just the bit of the iceberg that I'm able to project. And that experience, repeatedly having that experience, is a powerful, transformative practice, because there's an urgency and an intensity to trying to align those things, to trying to bring out what's really there. And a lot of times it's not fancier words that I need. It's just the words that express the thought chain, the right word at the right time that needs to come out. So I suppose this is my way of explaining to myself or affirming for myself what this practice is about today. But I also think there's a pretty deep lesson in there. For some people, I think this happens through the writing process. Julia Cameron famously says, writing brings clarity to the act of living. I think that's absolutely true. I think in some ways this is a form of writing. Speaking out loud is a form of writing. And it has a similar effect for me. It brings clarity to the act of living. So I suppose I'm celebrating that and reminding myself of that. Because every once in a while, that slips from view. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Thanks to those of you who watch this post regularly. It really is an honor to have people witnessing this, and to have people for whom this makes a difference. So thank you. Appreciate you. Have a great day. I'll see you soon.